Welcome! In this establishment, we only serve ranged DPS. Today, we are giving a serving of Covenants and Legendary combos to all ranged DPS. We are looking which one are currently performing the best, as well as which ones might be usable in combination, or if they are fine to be used as a standalone, regardless of what Legendary you are using if you're picking a certain Covenant, or what Covenant you are using based on the Legendary you want. Now! Pelagos and Emeni have got nerfed. Pelagos was the OP Soulbind because it was the only one that allowed you to have 2 potency conduits as well as 2 passive throughput increases. Not only did you have combat meditation for your mastery proc on the activation of your ability, but also you had let go of the past, your flat versatility increase. One of these 2 has just said goodbye and now it's turned into a defensive one, so now Pelagos is in line with the rest, and Emeni has a similar thing to combat meditation. Using your Covenant ability gave you a buff of primary stat, which is why it was so powerful. We will see that not many ranged DPS were going for Necrolord in the first place. They weren't going for the power of Emeni that was, pushing Necrolord ahead. When it comes to Kyrian, a few more specs were going for Kyrian, but many of them, particularly Hunters and Warlocks with Scoring Tide, were taking Kyrian because of the active effects and not as much for the passive effect that has just gotten nerfed. I mean, removed, in fact. The only real changes that you might see in the future, but again, tuning will be a thing, so even the certain ones we will see might change in the future, is going to be Shadow Priest and Balanced Druid might change a little bit more, given this change to Pelagos. We will have to see in the future what exactly will mean this nerf to Pelagos and how many specs going Kyrian because the Covenant ability wasn't that strong, but the passive effects of Pelagos pushed Kyrian to be the best. So for now, let's keep going on all the specs. We are starting with a boring one. As you might have seen already from my contractually obligated comment towards survival, that Hunters are in a pretty boring spot when it comes to Covenants. This is due to the fact that most of their Covenants have been nerfed. As simple as that. Death Chakram has been nerfed by over 50%, Flayed Shot has been nerfed by nearly a third, and Wild Spirits has also been nerfed, and it is also specifically for AoE. The only Covenant that is all-purpose for all types of damage is going to be Resonating Arrow for Kyrian. Critical Strike Chance, as well as the Conduit that gives you extra damage within this Covenant active, is going to be usable in all types of content, so that's the Covenant you're going for as Hunter. When it comes to your Legendaries, similar boredom ensues, because BM Hunter, similar to Survival, also wants to go for Soulforge Embers. This is a boring case of numbers dictating your Legendary. It doesn't matter about the synergy with your rotation, or the variety, or the enjoyment. It just does more damage. Likely, very likely, later on in the expansion, Relic Stalker's Piercing Fangs is going to become the to-go Legendary. It has been nerfed by 33%, so now it's a little bit weaker. Reason why the neutral Legendary Soulforge Embers has taken over, and in Mythic Plus obviously it remains Soulforge Embers due to their AoE capabilities. For Marksmanship Hunter, the general answer when you want to look for a Legendary is going to be Surging Shots. This is because Surging Shots can be used in essentially all situations, whether it is single target or AoE, Surging Shots is still going to be doing just fine. For the specialized Legendaries, you can go again for your Soulforge Embers for AoE, and even Secrets of the Unblinking Vigil, which is exclusively for AoE, or you can go for the reworked Serpent Stalker's Trickery, which is now single target. It can also have some uses if you want to go for Cleave and Spread Cleave by being able to attach to your aim shots your Serpent Stings, even without a talent. So it is a little bit of a disappointing state for Hunters, both in their Legendary choices and their Covenant choices. They have been regressed over time throughout the beta. Now, going back in order to Balanced Druid. The general all-purpose Covenant pick for you is going to be Kyrian. Yes, it is the most boring one, but it is also going to give you the most payoff, and it is also the easier to use for all types of content. Adaptive Swarm for Necrolord is very single target focused, and then you have your 2 big cooldowns, Convoke the Spirits and Ravenous Frenzy. The problem with Convoke the Spirits for Balanced Druid is that it has a 2-minute cooldown when your Celestial Alignment has a 3-minute cooldown. It's the fact that you want to do a very specific thing when you are inside your Eclipse, and when you go into Convoke the Spirits, you basically give up your mouse and keyboard and let the AI decide for you. And the problem is your AI can also decide to use regrowths and rejuvenations. It can use Starfall in a single target fight. It's not something you have control over. You can even screw yourself by being in melee range and triggering all of the feral druid abilities. So the only other option outside of Kyrian is going to be Ravenous Frenzy. The problem with Ravenous Frenzy is that it has gotten nerfed over time. It still does have the nice synergy of having a 3-minute cooldown that can be easily paired with Celestial Alignment. But beyond that, Kyrian just has an easier time using their Covenant ability for all types of damage profiles. When it comes to the legendaries, you have a very standout legendary, which is Balance of All Things, your front-loaded burst at the start of your Eclipse. When it comes to Mythic Plus, you have a couple of options. You can go for Onnit's Clear Vision or Primordial Arcanic Pulsar. Onnit's Clear Vision obviously works very well because in 99% of your Mythic Plus Trash pools you will want to use AoE damage. So even when you Star Surge, you will get your free procs of Starfall and vice versa, which is very nice for Mythic Plus. And Primordial Arcanic Pulsar simply has higher value on AoE situations compared to Balance of All Things. Talking about Druid, if you're thinking about playing multiple specs for Druid, then Cycle of Life and Death is the legendary to go. It is going to be fine for all specs, particularly for Resto Druid, for Feral Druid, and for Balanced Druid is actually very, very good. It is not weak at all, so you can still go for that if you want a multi-spec legendary. Now, when you look at mages, we have Frost Mage. When it comes to Covenants, they want to go for Ventir. The reason why you want to go for Ventir is because Frost Mage is very, very dependent on procs, Brain Freeze and Fingers of Frost, and Mirrors of Torment is going to guarantee you get a bunch of Brain Freeze procs. This is your all-round use for single target and cleave, and for AoE. If you want to go on a little bit more of a specialized route, then you can go for Kyrian for single target or Night Fae for AoE. Kyrian is very good for single target because of the way it works. You can tie together one of your Brain Freeze procs by using Radiant Spark and then using Flurry and your couple of empowered Ice Lances within the Radiant Spark empowered damage window, which is very nice in single target and in cleave, since you will be playing most likely with Splitting Ice. When it comes to AoE, Shifting Power obviously does more AoE damage, but also reduces the cooldown, particularly of your Frozen Orb, which is your key ability as a Frost Mage. When it comes to Frost Mage legendaries, despite a mountain of nerfs, Freezing Winds is still your best legendary for all-purpose use. When it comes to being specialized, you can go for Sleek Ice or pure single target, which is also going to scale very well later into the expansion. And then if you just want to pad and don't care about funnel and just do flat out AoE, you can go for Glacial Fragments. Now, when it comes to Fire, they do actually have more options. You know, Fire is looking better compared to before, and it was hard to look any worse than what they did and what they have been for a while. When you go for AoE and Mythic Plus, you can go for Night Fae for the same reason as Frost. Shifting Power is going to reduce the cooldown of your abilities by 20 seconds, 16 seconds of cooldown reduction, and then 4 seconds as you channel Shifting Power, which means things like Phoenix Flames, like Dragon's Breath, like Meteor, all these AoE-centered abilities, as well as Rune of Power, and even your Fire Blast charges are going to come off cooldown, so it's very handy in Mythic Plus for AoE situations. For single target, it is still Night Fae being better for Fire Mage, although, you know, sims are going on, they are updating by the day, by the hour, and the difference, let's say that your AoE ability is being reduced by your Night Fae Conduit, as well as the damage by the Night Fae Covenant, as well as the AoE damage that the Covenant does make it stronger in AoE, whereas for single target, Kyrian and even Ventir are closer to your Night Fae counterpart, but it is still the strongest. When it comes to legendaries, Firestorm is their better legendary. It has been buffed, one of the few legendaries that got buffed over time rather than nerfed, but you have to keep an eye out for some of the better scaling legendaries like Feathered Incantation and Sun King's Blessing, which are bound to become stronger and stronger as the gear improves for you as a Fire Mage. When it comes to Arcane Mage is exclusively and entirely about Night Fae. For the same reasons that Frost and Fire can benefit, Arcane just does this to an extreme extent. Not just because of your bigger cooldowns, like Presence of Mind, like Arcane Power, or even Evocation, but also because of your everyday rotational use abilities. Touch of the Magi as a cooldown, Rune of Power as a cooldown, your Arcane Orb as a cooldown, and all of this can be reduced by Shifting Power by 20 seconds every 45, which makes a great deal of difference for Arcane Mage. Now, when you look at the legendaries for Arcane Mage, You have one legendary, which is going to be better for all purpose uses, all damage profiles, all types of damage is going to be Arcane Harmony. Despite the nerfs, it is still a very good legendary for single target or for cleave up to 4 targets with your Arcane Barrage, of course. For AoE, at the very least 4 target AoE, Arcane Bombardment, it is still very powerful. Of course, it becomes very strong in Mythic Plus, where you constantly have targets getting close to death, meaning your Arcane Bombardment gets very high value. A special mention needs to be given to Temporal Warp, which is a very good legendary, constantly buffed over time. It has gotten to the point where it is now a 30% haste for 40 seconds, so basically a proper double Bloodlust for you. And this one though is obviously way more niche. This is going to depend on how many windows you can have, where it is going to be very important to have this haste buff. This haste buff can be stacked on top of your Bloodlust. Unlike the Legion version of this one actually stacks with the Bloodlust buff. So you can get even more haste in a single window, or you can spread the window into 2 different applications. Now the only problem with this is that if your raid decides to use Bloodlust at the 7th minute of an 8-minute fight, you are basically forced to use this legendary stacked with Bloodlust. You can't use it earlier, because of course you would then tag every raid member with Bloodlust when they don't want to have it. So again, this is very niche. I wouldn't recommend this to players who are not very into Mythic raiding and already know very well what types of damage they will need for every boss. It is much easier and better to use Arcane Harmony if you want to raid and if you want to Mythic Plus at the same time. Now, before finishing with Mage, I'm going to tell you that if you are planning on playing all 3 specs, at the very least 2 specs, if you consider Fire Mage as being dead, then you can go for Expanded Potential. It is actually a very good neutral legendary for the class, and it's going to have a good effectiveness on both specs. So, now, moving on. Now, moving on to Shadow Priest. There is some sadness, because the strongest legendary for all damage profiles is going to be Eternal Call of the Void. You know, the ghost of the 8.3 corruption has come back and has made this rather boring legendary your to-go for Shadow Priest. You can specialize better for single target with Talbadar's Stratagem. You can craft this if you know what you're doing. If you know that you want to focus more on single target, then Talbadar is going to be very fine, but otherwise RNG Tentacles are going to be the way to go. For your Covenants, then your choice is going to be Necrolord. Currently, for single target, Kyrian is going to be stronger. Your whole Boon of the Ascended and your extra burst you can gain from that Covenant is not really being recommended because of the Covenant ability in and of itself. Similar to what I mentioned with Fire Mage, it is more of a case of Kyrian Soulbind simply giving you more passive DPS traits to make it be on top. Whereas Necrolord, on the other hand, isn't that far behind the Kyrian in single target, and it is also stronger in AoE. And Shadow Priest is now in this awkward situation where they were going Pelagos for Kyrian because of Let Go of the Past and the extra combat boost that it gave, which is now being removed, or they were going Necrolord because of Emeni and Lead by Example, which was very good. And now they both got nerfed. So you will have to see exactly whether or not you want to go still for Kyrian and Boon of the Ascended, or if you want to go for Unholy Nova, which is better for AoE. But for now, these were the 2 mostly used Covenants for Shadow Priest. Now, for Elemental Shaman. Elemental is gone for a few months, a couple of months, with the idea, the hope, the possibility that Chain Harvest worked properly with Echoing Shock, essentially doubling the damage of a Covenant ability. This was fixed eventually, meaning that now Chain Harvest is not good anymore, because it doesn't get duplicated by Echoing Shock. So now your better Covenant is going to be Necrolord. Necrolord is going to give you better single target, better spread cleave than all the other Covenants, whereas for Mythic Plus, for AoE, Kyrian is going to be the better choice. Overall speaking, as an Elemental Shaman player, you have more than enough AoE already, and more than enough AoE power in your legendary. Extra synergy with your toolkit that Necrolord is going to give you is going to be much more valuable. Talking about the synergy, we can go in the legendaries. I'm happy that I didn't cave in to Philly Crafters. After the rework, a lot of people were shilling Elemental Equilibrium when I thought it was shit. Now, numbers are telling us that the better legendary overall is still Echoes of Great Sundering. For single target, you have Windspeaker's Lava Resurgence. Windspeaker was already highly rated due to how much of a cannonball your Lava Burst hits for now. Lava Burst is going to be one of your main damage dealers. It hits very hard. It is still not suffering too much from stat scaling, since Lava Burst doesn't benefit from crit. At the start of the expansion, that doesn't matter too much because you don't have stats, so you're not losing too much value from having crit, because you ain't got none. But for AoE, Echoes of Great Sundering is obviously incredibly powerful. It is the only real, proper AoE legendary you have. The reason why it makes it the strongest legendary overall is because it is also the second strongest legendary for single target. So being the strongest in AoE, being the second strongest in single target, and still being the strongest in 3 to 4 target cleave, especially even more so if the 3 to 4 target cleave is targets with not much health, targets dying quickly, not giving you time to spread your flame shock and start getting the benefit of that. It makes it the easier and the easiest legendary to pick. Now, our last class is going to be Warlock. Now, when it comes to Warlocks, they have kind of gotten huntered. Their Covenant abilities have been nerfed multiple times to the point that not much choice was left. Decimating Bolt was nerfed quite a bit, Impending Catastrophe Damage was also gutted, and Soul Rot had a very difficult way of being able to be used properly, on top of the fact that the only talent that synergizes with Drain Life was given to Affliction only, and not the other two specs. This made Destruction and Affliction sort of default back to Kyrian and Scoring Tithe. For Destruction, it's a little bit more depressing since they don't have basically any synergy with Scoring Tithe. The DOT doesn't do anything for them. For Affliction, it is better. Scoring Tithe was already a good Covenant ability for single target because it's a DOT. It works with Malefic Rapture, so they're gonna be fine with that. The real change here is that Demonology has gone rogue. For AoE, they don't have that many good picks. They can still go Kyrian and they can go Ventir for Impending Catastrophe AoE, but the real change is going to be their single target and their raid damage with Necrolord. Essentially, Demonology has gone rogue. They have Forsaken their minion damage, they have Forsaken being a pet spec, and they just said fuck them, we are actually a caster and they are trying to play caster now. How? Well, their base passive, Demonic Core, after summoning and expending your Wild Imps, can give you an instacast of Demon Bolt, stacking up 4 times. When you take Conduits like Born of Blood to give you more Demonic Cores, when you take Tyrant Soul to give you more Demonic Cores, when you talent into From the Shadows to make the targets hit by your Dreadstalkers take more Shadow Flame damage, which is the damage of Demon Bolt, when you take Power Siphon, which instantly gives you 2 charges of Demonic Core and buffs Demon Bolt damage, and when you take Sacrifice Souls, which further increases the damage of your Demon Bolt, you can then take Bale Spider's Burning Core. And you can see where this is going. You will get to 3 stacks of this legendary, you will make sure you have 4 Demonic Core stacks, and then you summon your Dreadstalkers, they apply the damage debuff on the target, you cast 1 more Shadow Bolt, you get the 4 stack buff, and then you just go to town with your Demon Bolt damage. And this can be made even stronger every 45 seconds by your Decimating Bolt, buffing your next very powerful, very empowered Demon Bolt. Now, this is all cool and nice if it wasn't for the fact that Demonology scales with their mastery, which is pet damage, so this entire build is doomed to fail eventually, but for now, I guess it's pretty flavorful. For your old school Demonology, the good old days of pet damage, you can still go for Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling, especially in Mythic Plus, as well as the return of Implosive Potential. These are going to be more all-purpose, flexible legendaries centered around your pet damage. It's not going to be as strict single-target Demon Bolt damage funneling build that is going on right now. So I would wait even longer if I were a Demonology Warlock wanting to craft and to build myself around the Demon Bolt build. But this is going to require, more tuning, more data, and we'll see later on just how good this build is going to be. When it comes to Affliction and Destruction, Affliction has very clear legendaries, Malefic Wrath for single target and Perpetual Agony, or even Wrath of Consumption for AoE. Wrath of Consumption is going to be good in Mythic Plus, targets are going to keep dying and you're going to keep that buff up, and Perpetual Agony is just consistent Soul Shard generation on multiple targets, whereas Malefic Wrath with your Drain Soul talented is just going to be more single target damage, and that's it. Even stronger, of course, in Execute phase with your Drain Soul. For Destruction, on the other hand, you still have the option to go AoE with Wilfred's Sigil as a legendary. That is also fine for single target, but particularly for your Infernal Burst in AoE. When you will go in Mythic Plus, you will be able to pair this legendary with something like Inferno or with something like Fire and Brimstone to give you much higher soul shard generation, which is going to give you a much shorter cooldown on your Infernal. Whereas Cinders of the Ajakir for now is just going to smooth your rotation very well for destruction, because you will play 99% of the time with Fleshover. More charges of Conflagrate are going to smooth your rotation. You know, they're going to give you the haste you don't have with your gear, thanks to Fleshover, as well as the fact that right now you don't have enough haste to begin with to start benefiting from your cycle of Chaos Bolt spam that you will eventually be able to get later into the expansions. So the several legendaries tuned around your Chaos Bolt damage for now are a little bit undertuned because of your own lack of power. And with Warlocks we have done all the ranged DPS. There has been a turnaround compared to tanks and healers, where Night Fae is way more used for DPS. On the opposite, Ventir is way more used for melee DPS than it is for ranged DPS. Ranged DPS preferring more Necrolord instead. Now, with this, we are done with the ranged DPS. After the melee, the healers and the tanks, there's nothing left. What there is left is just about less than a week before the expansion. But what's missing before we go live with the actual game for once is going to be the what to do in the first 3 weeks, what to do in the first resets, as well as the final video of the hopes and wishes and fears for Shadowlands, almost as a letter to Santa, hoping for a better future. Now, see you guys in the near future, and with this I take my leave. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, why am I talking like this?